tea, black to red. I know I stand out, I don't need to try for it. I jack the limelight if you don't think your head kick. I tell them catch me if you can, on some gingerbread. Oh, I never ride solo. It's me and my chick looking like slow-mo.
Hey guys, what's going on down here from Tampa? I had to track down the Honorable Harry Thomas Jr. because he's a global trotter. He goes everywhere and every time, so you have to slow him down. He's in a hotel today doing the show. Harry, I appreciate you coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me, General. Appreciate
it. So Harry, tell us a little bit about yourself and becoming an ambassador.
Well, I'm born in New York City to parents who were from South Carolina. Both went to HBCUs, to Allen and Morris Brown, and my mom was a social worker. My dad was a businessman, but he was served in World War II and Korea, as did all of my uncles all the way through. So everybody was in the military except me. And I went to College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts and Columbia University in New York, and worked as an urban planner in New York City. And it was my boss there, Edward J. Lowe, who told me about the Foreign Service and recommended I join and take the exam.
Oh, wow. So did you ever think you were going to be an ambassador?
No, I was hoping, but I was just happy to have a job, the ability to represent our nation and travel overseas. We're commissioned officers like the military are, so our ranks equate to military ranks. So you start as a lieutenant, and once you become a full bird colonel equivalent, you can apply to be a general. And once you become a general equivalent, which we call counselor, then you can apply to become an ambassador.
Oh, okay. So you've been an ambassador of Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, which used to be Rhodesia,
yes.
Southern Rhodesia. And I got a lot of friends that are Dutch that are from Rhodesia, but we also have this conversation because they all came to the States. And what I did not know, and I'm going to get back to you, but you can kind of touch on this. I didn't know that there was a huge Jewish population in South Rhodesia after World War II, that a lot of the people, the Jews from Europe went to Rhodesia, but we'll touch on that. And then you were in Pacific Asia at the Philippines. So what's the difference between being in Asia and Africa first?
Well, the U.S. has different interests in those countries, but at the same time, you have to learn people. You have to learn their language and their culture, so you can represent our country well and tell our country what those people are thinking. Clearly, Philippines was our only colony, so you had that strategic relationship because of Subic Bay and Clark Air Force Base, and now the Chinese interests. Bangladesh was a British colony. It was a tremendous economic interest for the United States because of all the apparel that comes from Bangladesh, as well as the shrimp and prawns that we import from Bangladesh. But it was more of an apparel economic trade interest. Now they have gas, which Chevron taps into. Zimbabwe had been something where we had supported the end of apartheid, but their government was not one that was favorable to the United States under Robert Mugabe, and he was more of a harm to his own people than he was to the United States. And yes, there was Jewish population in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, as well as South Africa. South Africa still has a Jewish population. A friend of mine from Tampa, his father was a doctor in Rhodesia during the apartheid era. Rob Auslander, good friend of mine who comes from a Jewish family. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I find that because I mean I did a little bit of work over in the Balkans right after the civil war they had in there between the Serbians. So I learned a lot. So when I had a lot of meetings at my time when I was a little bit higher in rank, I was meeting with all the ambassadors. So you guys are political appointees by whatever administration comes in, kind of like generals are appointed by the president.
Yes, we're career ambassador appointments are in the Constitution. So the president of the day picks you, and you go before the Senate for confirmation. And then the country has to agree to allow you to serve there. And then you serve there on average for 3 years. But it's at the pleasure of the president, so you can be shorter or longer.
Right. And so it's a complex job. And, so what are some of the challenges that you face because you're selected to go into a country? Some ambassadors don't speak the language, but what I'm finding out more and more is a lot of ambassadors they pick now actually speak the native language. So you were in 3 different areas. So did you? I saw a couple of your interviews on the news, different news outlets that you were, and I saw you, speaking Filipino. So. Yeah, is it a very important thing for you to pick up some of the language for that host nation?
Yeah. Yes. I learned to speak Hindi, Bengali, Tagalog at the Foreign Service Institute on Route 50 in Arlington. And it's right next to the U.S. Army Reserve Command. But that's where I learned to speak languages. But clearly you speak better once you get to a country. Right. And that you're interacting with the local people. It's important in any country we go to learn to speak the language. And languages are not hard to learn. Around the world, children learn 3 to 5 languages in their villages. And so it's something I endorse and something you should not be afraid of to be able to be successful in any venue.
Okay, so let's touch on the Philippines first, because, we had a lot of history with the Philippines. I'm not going to get into a big history lesson with everybody about how we ended up with the Philippines, because it was shady, just like Hawaii. Yeah. But at the end of the day, you came in, I think Aquino was back in, and you were trying to get a couple of the issues with economics, which happened to do with some of the human trafficking, some of the work trafficking, but trying to actually build a better relationship. And I think you were appointed under Obama at the time.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Well, when I arrived, Gloria Arroyo was finishing her term. They had elections. President Aquino took over. And one of the challenges we faced was Philippines being very high on human trafficking, not just sex, but labor trafficking. Right. And it was very important for Secretary Clinton as well as President Obama to try to put a dent in this. But one of the things, this comes out of poverty and sometimes greed. But it's not just sexual trafficking, it's labor trafficking also. And so the government of the Philippines actually cooperated with us. But once, as you know, Vince, you're peeling back an onion. The deeper you go, the more of a challenge you find. And it's not something that can stop overnight. And there were Filipinos trafficked to the U.S. To work in senior citizens' homes, people who were coming here for legitimate jobs as teachers, educators, who ended up being trafficked and working senior citizens' homes in the Southwest. Yeah. At the same time, you had Americans going there to the Philippines for sexual trafficking of children, not just boys, but girls. It was shameful. Australians, Korean, Japanese, taking advantage of the poverty that people had. Right. But sometimes there were people there in the Philippines who wanted to, engage in being pimps, as we say, pimps of children, pimps of adults. And we had various programs working with prosecutors, some who were courageous to stem that. We were on Dateline, where we went in and had people going in there to stop that. And we had cases where a man was convicted of having children so that he could sexually abuse them. And under U.S. law, he was successfully prosecuted. Money went into a trust fund for those 2 girls. But you want to prevent that. You don't want to see that happening anywhere. I hope the Trump administration puts this seriously. I don't know if they are, to be frank. But after drug trafficking, human trafficking is almost as profitable around the world. And that is something that we as a nation need to stop. You have in Mexico, and when I left the Philippines, I was sent to Arizona State University as a diplomat in residence. And there was sexual trafficking and labor trafficking from Mexico into the United States. But Mrs. McCain, who later became an ambassador herself under Biden, really helped put the work with the NFL to get the first human trafficking laws put into Arizona on the state level. And
wow.
and the NFL put pressure behind that. So she deserves credit for that. But again, these are tips of the iceberg, where children are trafficked for sex at young ages. In the Philippines, we found children as young as 18 months being trafficked.
One of the other things that we also had to address was, you talked about labor, and I don't think that a lot of people know that the Philippines are one of the top countries that provide nurses around in the globe. Because you go to England, a lot of the nurses in England are actually from the Philippines. So they have one of the hugest nursing programs, but they were being very, very underpaid for the amount of work they were doing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We used to take a lot of Filipino nurses to the U.S., but nursing has again become a very attractive industry in America. So the Filipino nurses that come now are usually nephrology nurses or cardiac specialists.
Right.
But we also take physical therapists in countries such as Germany, the UK, and now even Japan, because of their aging population, are taking Filipino nurses who are very highly qualified. But the challenges that you have faced in other places, particularly the Middle East, is where these people have been abused.
Oh, I saw that when I was in Iraq. We went to Kuwait. Don't come after me. Went into Kuwait, went into Bahrain. The expats are totally mistreated there, but they don't have a passport. They can't come back. They're put in certain circumstances where they're doing massive labor, and with no major return on what they're investing in. And I'm glad that you were at the tip of the spear of that. So what were some of the challenges that you faced when you were in Africa? Because Africa is a complex continent. I was in Addis several times for discussions. I was part of AFRICOM and support missions on the continent of Africa. And I have to say the continent because I get so tired of people lumping all of Africa. It's like one state when it's a multitude of countries, and they all have their own tribal ways. They have their own laws and rules. And, so it was interesting to sit in Africa at Addis as an American rep and listen to the different countries with their different problems, looking at the U.S. not for as much support during that time, but more so as guidance to get them so they'll be self-sufficient off the Chinese who are trying to take over Africa, the continent itself.
Yes, well, I knew the first AFRICOM commander very well. And Kip Ward is a good friend of mine, Morgan State grad, and he had been Dr. Rice's military assistant when I was her executive secretary. Right. And I had first served in Nigeria in 1986 to 88, and that's far different than Zimbabwe, which I lived in 89 to 92, and again 2016 to 2018. We tried to work with the West Africans to build airports because at that time it was so difficult to travel from West Africa to Europe, easier to travel from West Africa to Europe than it was from West Africa to another African nation. But the Africans were very suspicious and not trusting of us. And even our British and French colleagues were suspicious of what we were doing. And perhaps we should have been more transparent or slower, but we were actually trying to help them in building these airports that would ease their economies. And sometimes the French were not enthused, but you see that 15 years later, the French have not had good relations with their former colonies in West Africa, in Niger and Burkina Faso. And I think it's because of lack of economic development. In Zimbabwe, where I was, President Mugabe had been president for many years, and he was hostile to President Obama. He felt that President Obama was foisting gays on them because we had changed our policy toward gays in the military, gays in America, gay immigration and marriage. And he used his dislike of gays to
well, it was in the news.
really, yeah,
Right. It was in the news.
He really disliked that. In Zimbabwe being a conservative country with religions, they heard a lot of American evangelicals who came there who said this was an abomination, not something that I agree with. But there, we did work. We worked with the British, the Canadians, the Swedes to host events for gays during Pride Month. And as long as we didn't have marches or do it loudly, we were able to open up for Black gays in Zimbabwe to have conversation with their own families about their lifestyles.
Right. And
people were willing to listen as long as it was behind closed doors. And that was some progress. But Mr. Mugabe, who had been a freedom fighter, stayed in government too long. And he tried to hand the government to his wife.
Right.
And the other people below him in the military wanted to take power, which they eventually did. And they haven't done a good job of ruling the country. It's had the world's highest inflation under Mugabe, and then again under his successor, Mnangagwa. And the U.S. was an easy place to blame. But they had
absolutely.
Yeah, they had such highly educated people in Zimbabwe. They've had numerous Rhodes Scholars. They've had people who worked on the guy who did the robotic arm for the Mars lunar landing was a Zimbabwean who immigrated to America and worked at NASA. And you have a billionaire, Strive Masiwa, who spends time between the UK and the United States. He is educated many Zimbabweans at Yale, but also over 40 he sent to Morehouse, including Morehouse's most recent Rhodes Scholar. Yes. And he was the commencement speaker at Morehouse several years ago. So, and the HBCUs had a tradition of bringing people from what was Rhodesia to America to study, to give them an opportunity. So it's a complex and long-standing relationship that we had. President Bush and President Clinton put sanctions on Zimbabwe because of their heinous political actions. But the IMF and the World Bank, they weren't paying back their loans. But the worst thing is his treatment of fellow Zimbabweans.
Crazy.
Yeah, he was a dictator, and unfortunately, he's been succeeded by a dictator.
But it seems that to be a norm in Africa, because when and I'm going to touch on one thing, go back couple steps. Is you made a comment about you'd have to go to one place, and that's what a lot of people don't understand in Africa. So I would literally have to fly into England, fly down to a country at a certain time, fly out of that country back to England, and then fly from England back to another country, or fly over to Frankfurt to another part of Africa. It was never a direct line. And I remember at one point they were trying to come up with a plan to, and when you were talking about the road construction of making a national highway through Africa, getting the airports bigger so they could be more international. And a lot of the pushback came due to just the same problem we had in the Balkans, was corruption. The money wasn't going where it needed to be, so it's hard to fund anything in some of the countries just due to corruption.
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, there was massive corruption, which still takes place. And I am not preaching to the Africans. We have our own corruption. We have our own challenges. We just saw President Trump humiliate President Ramaphosa in his office. He said that there were South Africans being killed when actually there were pictures of graves in the Congo.
Right.
Elon Musk tricked Trump, and they bought 59 Afrikaners who they say were under threat. And these were Afrikaners who wanted apartheid to continue. So that's a disgraceful and act by the United States. Why I really oppose corruption is because it broke my heart to see how many Africans were being affected by their corrupt governments. But we can't preach to them about being superior. We want them to be better. And that was what Kip Ward and others were trying to do in AFRICOM. And again, it didn't work, but it wasn't Kip's fault. And I would love.
I don't think he was given the resource. So I mean, I was lieutenant under Kip. I was a major at the time, and I like to just stay on this word real quick though. But honestly, when AFRICOM stood up there in Stuttgart, I like the fact he tried to move it to Atlanta. To keep Atlanta going when they wanted to close, which made no sense in closing the bases in Atlanta and moving them to Bragg when you had an international airport in Atlanta. I'm gonna leave that one alone for another day.
Yeah, you know.
But so he was trying to put the headquarters in Atlanta, which made sense because Atlanta has major hubs to almost all of Africa, most parts of Africa. Second, I give him a credit on is that he had a structure with almost no resources because even though he was an Army commander, they pretty much put the Marines as his baseline, which doesn't make a lot of sense because they're an amphibious group when they should have plussed him up with Army personnel who actually do phase 4 operations of land operations, establish police force, establishing infrastructure. And so my thing was, on paper, AFRICOM looked great when it stood up. But when you peel the onion back, as you say, or you peeled it back, you saw the resources of personnel that are needed to do not nation building, but to help facilitate a country standing on phase 4 operations. It wasn't given to him.
Not even close did he have the same resources as Indo-PACOM or CENTCOM. So that was laughable. At the same time, though, in recent years, our Army was able to train with the South African Army. We were able to have programs where we brought, obviously, through the DOD and state African officers here for everything from commando training to human rights and leadership training. And several of those programs are being cut or withered away. And that is myopic on our part because it's making Beijing and Moscow very happy. It's making the Wagner Group from Putin very happy. It's making China, who goes in and partners with leaders, but not the people, and extracts resources at low prices, very happy. The conservation that we were interested in to help rhinos, elephants, save that, which China and Russia are not interested in. Those programs are being frittered away by this current Trump administration. But, Kip and his successors were swimming against the tide without sufficient resources to do the job that needed to be done, but they did their best. And now when you're being told Africa isn't important, that's going to make these countries ally with China. You can't humiliate a president of a nation, whether it's South Africa or any nation in the Oval Office, and expect him not to take actions.
And go in different directions. Yeah.
Right. It is. Why would you invite somebody to your house to humiliate them? So if my wife and I invited you and your family over, Vince, and then we start crapping over you, you're not coming back.
No.
And then you're going to seek a better host next time.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at King of Faso the other day. King of Faso made that, and they were having a conversation of the leader there talking to Putin, and everybody's like, I just don't get. Well, he's doing what needs to be done. When you realize the experiment, the democracy of America, is not supporting its own tentative that we set back after World War I. That's on us. So don't expect other countries to stay in our corner when we do need them for resources. It's like we're burning our own bridges to some degree.
We are burning our bridges to a major degree. And the other thing I would like to see more of, Vince, you're doing podcasts, you're looking at interests around the world, but our community in the mainstream media, the African American media, is not looking at Africa. It's not looking at international challenges that people of color are facing. And it boggles the mind why they are not. Some of them are wearing dashikis and, Africa thing, but they are not traveling to Africa. They're not engaging African leaders. They're not even talking about what Trump is doing to Africa. Right. And so I praise you for doing that.
Yeah, I look at the African, and I'm glad you brought up the African community. That was a interesting segue there for me, because my struggle right now is that because we have went from the last 30 years of a generation of parents that have not taught the next generation, not just about African history, but just taught basic African American history. So the average African American student right now, if you were to sit down and just go through some different trivia, they can't answer the question, but they could tell you every rap song. They could tell you, everything other than the culture. And so this is what I tell every time I do a speaking. I was just a commencement speaker at Georgia Southern.
Congratulations.
I appreciate that. And I tell everyone is you can never fix the African American community until you put culture back into the African American community, because that's where the other cultures have the advantage. They have a sense of family. And Africans do have that.
I will say this, though. If you go there, remember Jay Leno used to have a show, Jaywalking, and he'd ask people where the White House was, and nobody knew. And they've gone on college campuses at predominantly white institutions, asked them these questions, and they didn't know. But they can afford not to know. Our kids cannot afford not to know.
And I like how you said that.
And that is on us. When I was a child, my parents bought these books, Negro Heritage Library, and it had these. It was for kids. It was like the World Book Encyclopedia, but for Black folks. And it had all of these illustrations of us, people who were successes, but also stories of Africa. And it piqued my interest, my sister's interest. So we have the ability to do this. We've done this before. There's a Negro Caravan, this book that was published in 1942 that my father gave me. All these stories by people of color about the world. So the school only has your kid 6 hours a day, doesn't have your kid in the summer.
Right.
Sports are great. We all participated in it. I love it.
You can still read.
But you got to read. You got to read a book. I am in a hotel because I came up here, even though I'm a proud Sigma, I play in the Omega Psi Phi Charles Drew golf tournament. And yesterday we raised $39,000, of which $3,000 is going to 13 kids to help them get education. It's a partial scholarship. To them, it's a lot.
Right.
And so our kids, we have the ability to take care and help our kids. We can't just lament what Trump's doing, cry about it, but the Divine Nine, the military, when I lived in DC before, and I was active in another fraternity, and they gave which really dominated by military officers, African Americans. Right. And you gave a lot of scholarships to kids starting in 6th grade. We started initially 9th grade, but then 6th grade. We took them out to dinner, to lunches, to ball games, but gave them scholarships. So our community has the ability to do this.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So let me ask you this question. And so what college courses should a student take that they listen to this, take to become a diplomat and because it's a selfless service is what you do.
Yes, Vince, our exam is like a GRE or a GMAT.
Whoa.
So that's okay. That's okay. you need to learn English, math. You're going to get that. But take languages. Take languages in college. I didn't take a language until I was in the Foreign Service. But
Really?
these kids,
Oh, I
yes.
speak German. Yeah, I learned in, but I grew up in Germany, so yeah,
Right.
naturally.
Well, one thing you know is that now these kids can go junior year abroad or
Right.
a junior semester abroad. Take advantage of that. Go to a country where you have to learn the language. You will make yourself much more prepared for the public sector or the private sector or NGO sector by having traveled, by speaking a language. That'll make it easy if you choose to enter the diplomatic corps, but you'll also be better prepared if you want to go into the military or you want to work for Goldman Sachs.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think America, we've got to get past the point of starting languages earlier. But the funny thing about it is, even in the South, there's so much pushback for kids to start learning a foreign language. And I'll tell you what shocks me and why we're on languages is that even Puerto Ricans I know, I got friends with Cubans I know, they don't even teach their kids Spanish, and they're second generation, third generation. It's like not even spoken. And I'm like, you know the harm you're doing because they're around their grandmother. Let the grandmother just speak Spanish to them. Oh, they understand it. They just don't speak it. I'm like, come on.
Yeah, I hear that all the time. I think that's an excuse. The world is fully integrated now. We get the news from many sources, whether it's incorrect or correct. We get music, TV programs. I can watch Netflix South Africa. I can watch movies from Nigeria. I can do all of that. The world, if African Americans, other people of color are going to compete, we have to be able to do well in languages, science, and math. And that has to start when you're in preschool. When you're, we can't push back on foreign language. That's because of this fear among some in our community.
Right.
But African leaders that they say they look up to speak several languages.
Right. That's what blows my mind. Yeah, absolutely. All my friends from Africa that I'm friends with speak at least 3 languages. My friends in Botswana speak at least 3 languages. So I got another. Okay, so the next thing I have is, all right, so lately in the 21st century, you very rarely or even hear anything about the UN. Except when Nikki Haley was there, it was kind of the last kind of things you ever heard about it. Why have it seems that we have in the last 10 years pretty much like the UN doesn't even exist? You don't even, like, if you talk to people today, probably most people don't even realize why the UN is in New York or why it's there.
That's a shame. Actually, the Trump administration and others have demonized the UN. World War II, the UN ended when the UN began. The US controlled the world's economy.
Right.
We dictated foreign policy around the world, except to the Soviet Union, basically. Well, we won. What happened was more countries got their independence. More countries had their thoughts. And while they may like democracy, they have their own version of democracy, they may not always agree with you.
Right.
And if somebody doesn't always agree with you, that doesn't mean he's not your friend. You know, a real friend tells you the truth.
True statement. You know? Even if you're the country that's hosting them, they tell you, look, you got some civil rights issues in your own country, like during the 60s, during apartheid and the civil rights movement. You know,
100%.
The Europeans were calling us out on it.
So Americans don't want to hear that. Trump administration doesn't want to hear it. Who are these people of color telling me that I got a problem? You know, so that is juvenile, because United Nations gives people an opportunity to speak. My good friend Linda Thomas Greenfield was our ambassador under Biden. It was a very difficult job, but the UN agencies do missile control. The UN agencies do art and culture. Not only that, they feed people. The UN agency does refugees.
Right.
Right? The UN agencies do AIDS. And the last thing, I want to touch on is all of that was done with the UN, but with US help. President Bush started PEPFAR to take care of AIDS.
Right.
Now, President Trump has ended that funding. So we have African kids, Asian kids dying. And where is the outcry from America?
Right, I mean, Haiti and that, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you got Haiti falling apart. You got Africa. So, you're absolutely right that as a global leader, and I get in this argument with a lot of my friends on this all the time. We accepted a job after World War I, and definitely accelerated it after World War II. That just the nature of the beast. And what you should have done is went back to Monroe Doctrine if you didn't want to be in the situation you were in. But we decided to establish organizations that were going to world groups and all these other different organizations. And so my heart breaks for Gaza right now, honestly, because normally, even though the Israelis have a right to defend themselves, though, let me be clear on that. However, at the end of the day, children dying in Gaza, I struggle with that concept. At this point, the U.S. should be taking the lead, working with the people in Gaza to make sure that whatever's left of it, that we fix it. I mean, we've broken a lot of countries and we fixed them, but everybody goes, it's not in our national defense or in our national interest. Well, this is one of the ones that's got to be a human interest.
Yes, I agree with you. Clearly, Israel has a right to defend itself, and we support that right, and we want any Israeli hostages released. At the same time, as parents, as members of the global community, you don't want to see anyone starve, especially a child.
Right.
And so that could be fixed. And any friends that I know, like I have people that I know also who disparage the UN, but they haven't taken the time to investigate what the UN does. So I would challenge them to, okay, you do your research and then come back. Just do your research. You just don't like it because you don't like it. You think which is silly. I don't mind disagreeing with somebody who has the facts, but this is an emotional disagreement based on their politics at that time. And yes, if we're feeding or saving a child in Africa, we should do the same in Appalachia and the same in Minnesota. But those budgets are being cut also.
Right.
So that money that you say is you incorrectly say is being wasted in Africa is not going to be spent in Appalachia or DC. But they're intellectually lazy.
Yeah, and it's a human condition. So before we get out of here, I got my last question for you. So what advice do you give young people today about global issues? Because I think we were a little bit more globally savvy from like the late 60s through the early mid 80s than we are now. I think after 9/11, it seemed like we've taken a brain dump on global issues, and we only look at if it impacts us personally or impacts us emotionally.
Yes, and that is, I was naive, Vince. I've been shocked by people not being interested in foreign affairs and the challenges our nation faces. Young people are our future. They're interconnected. It's not just the languages and the history. They have the opportunity to do what I couldn't do, as travel inexpensively through their high schools. Rotary Club, which is in all cities, takes kids overseas.
Yeah.
Join that or through their parents. High schools have programs. They can fundraise. Hey, you can fundraise for your kid to go to a national AAU basketball team thing. You can fundraise for your kids to go places. My friend who just passed away, unfortunately, Bismarck Myrick, used to, through his church in in Hampton Roads, take his kids to South Africa every winter. Bismarck Myrick joined the United States Army as a private. He used to sell jet magazines to sailors coming off ships when he was a kid. He joined as a private. He went to Vietnam. He went to OCS school. He fought in Vietnam. He won every medal the United States of America gives except the Medal of Honor, everything below. He became an ambassador after he retired. And there's a statue of him in Hampton Roads. So he went from nothing to becoming an officer in our military, a combat hero, twice an ambassador, but he never stopped giving back, taking these kids through his church, raise funds every year to take kids to South Africa. He's an American hero, one of many that we don't, are silent, hidden heroes.
No, there's so many. And just on that note, for Harry Thomas Jr., I want to say, hey, thank you for coming on. And you are an American hero. You know, you led the country through different ambassadorships to different countries. Harry, before I close out, any final words you have out there for any young person?
Gracias, salamat, donabad. I just said thank you in several languages. Just thank you for having me. To young people, always be kind, and always be inquisitive.
There you go. All right. With that meaning, keep it rolling, guys. I'll talk to you soon.
God bless. Take care.